Yes.
Those who are eagle-eyed will see that I'm not in presentation mode. I have learned from bitter experience, if I put my computer in presentation mode, it will crash. So I'm just going to go through the slides like this. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about inviting artificial intelligence into the archives and to see how handwriting recognition technology has been received by historians. And the crux of this really is to look at how we can get images of manuscripts and take them and turn them into machine processable text. And after that, you can do with that what you like, further analysis or sharing on websites or putting into catalogues to allow people to search things better. But today I'm not necessarily going to talk about how this works, because if there's one thing I want you to take away today is that this is working. It now works. We're at a stage where this technology is now being rolled out across the heritage sector. It's no longer science fiction. It now works. I want to talk about what happens to historical practice now that this is working and some of the things that we need to think about as libraries, archives and museums, given that we are now engaging with this and producing lots of machine generated text by artificial intelligence. So, what am I going to cover? Today I'm going to briefly talk about handwritten text recognition and where it comes from. I'm going to focus most of my comments about Transkribus, and hands up, I'm on the board of Transkribus and I've been part of this project for 10 years now. So I just wanted to flag that up. I will try not be an advert for Transkribus. I'm trying to talk about some of these scholarly issues that come up when using HTR. I'm going to talk about the results of a large-scale user survey I did with users of Transkribus to try and figure out how it was changing what they were doing and their normal practice, and who our users were. So there's a snapshot of the user community, and then I'm going to talk about some of these themes which are coming out about how handwritten text recognition is affecting historians, affecting researchers, and the things we need to look out for as it rolls across the sector. So, why HDR? HDR is important because the transcription of archival material by humans is so expensive. Getting someone to sit down in front of a manuscript or an image of a manuscript and to manually transcribe it is very costly. Now, I want you to remember that I've mentioned humans here because I'm going to come back to humans at the end and the place of humans in this when we bring artificial intelligence into this. There are other technologies which exist which can be pointed at text. Most people will be aware of OCR, optical character recognition. That's best used for print and especially for individual characters where they're delineated. So it was designed to identify each character, like these above me. They've got a space between them rather than handwriting. Handwritten text recognition is designed for handwriting analysis where characters join up, and it does that by calculating a set of overlapping probabilities to identify lines, words and characters. That's much more computationally expensive than OCR, which means we tend to use high performance computing units to do it, and we also use machine learning. So machine learning is where we can train the computer and we run it and we see how it gets on, and then we go, you didn't get it quite right there, you didn't get it quite right there, and then it trains itself to do better with input again from humans. It's important that we keep the human in the loop here to train these systems, and then once you've trained the system up, it can look at mass digitized content and generate machine processable text from it. So that's the key to this, is training up something, getting the quality right, and we're now getting 98-99% accuracy on handwritten text. There are various approaches to HTR. I don't have the time to go into that today, but there's a long history going back to the 1960s. Now, on modern times, we use machine learning on this aspect of large-scale computing. And if you wanted to employ HTR within your library or archive, there are various ways to do it. The first one is that you can undertake some research yourself and program up your own solution. A lot of the algorithms are out there, so many people work with computing scientists to look at their own collections, and that's absolutely fine. Another thing you can do is go with a service provider such as Google and use their API and actually put it through their algorithms that they've developed. But a third way is you can use Transkribus. And so Transkribus is the leading system at the moment for digitised documents. It was funded by 2 European Union grants starting in 2013 onwards. Since 2019, it has been operated by a cooperative under a European cooperative model. So we're not trying to make huge amounts of profit. We're trying to keep this system up and running for the community, although people do have to pay for it now. So since October 2020, given that we're no longer grant funded, we do charge people to access the system, but it's not huge amounts. It's just enough to keep the system going under this cooperative model. So how does it work? We put in the text, the machine identifies lines, it identifies words, it then gives, it spits out what it thinks that says. It's up to the human to correct that, and generally with about 70 to 90 pages of going through and correcting, feed that back to the model. That then generates a bigger model within the machine, within the high performance computing unit, and then we can apply that model across various other documents and get great accuracy. And we are dependent on a complex relationship between scholars using this or individuals using this and helping to correct the material, the archives themselves that are putting in their mass digitized content and running large scale material through this, the computer scientists developing the technology, and also volunteers who are helping us with correcting. And that all means that we have built, over the past 9 years, we have built this really nuanced model at the University of Innsbruck, because it sits on the high performance computing unit there, and we can then run it and increase the accuracy for everybody else. Transkribus launched to the public in 2015. Since then, we have become very popular. We hit 50,000 users in February 2021. By the end of last month, the reports came through that we have now processed 20.8 million images of handwritten archival material. We have about 1,400 active users a week. So we do have a cohort of people who are using this all the time. We know that this cohort is throughout the world. So here's a map I generated from the IP addresses of people logging into the system, and we can see that it is used worldwide. I just want to say how rare it is for a digital humanities project to have made a bit of software that carries on past its grant funded time and is actively used and has turned out into a spin-out company which now is serving a worldwide audience. So we're incredibly proud of that, and we're walking that tightrope almost of how to keep that grant funded project alive beyond the funded phase. So I wanted to reach out to the users and ask them about how they were using Transkribus and what it meant for their practice. So I undertook a survey, it was a couple of years ago now, but I undertook a survey which I asked 50 very detailed questions, which was sent out to all the 20,000 registered users at the time, or through the newsletter and also through the Facebook groups. There are 2 Facebook groups which are very active, one the official one, Transkribus platform, and the other one, the non-official one, which is just a group of users set up on Facebook, and that's where a lot of Q&A happens. If you want to learn about Transkribus, join these Facebook groups. We got a 20% response rate from active users that month, which is okay, so 155 responses. What can we tell about users? Firstly, we have a European majority of users. Only half of the users that responded to the survey were academic researchers. There's a huge amount of folks from the genealogical community and hobby historians, as we would call them, amateur historians, that are using this too. 64% of people are using it for their own project. So there are some major institutional projects, but there's a lot of people using this on their own. Only 30% of people would say they were expert paleographers before using Transkribus. 36% of people were absolute beginners, had heard about this technology and are trying to see it through. And a quarter of the people responded had been using Transkribus for over a year, but we are seeing lots and lots of new users, and we have to support them. Of the projects that they were doing, in total, when you added up all the word count of what they thought they were going to get, there was about 8 million words coming out of these projects by these 155 people, and lots of people were working on very small collections. So 62% of people were working on collections which were smaller than 1,000 pages. So these are the amateur historians and the genealogists. And only a fraction were working on the bigger collections, so libraries and archives putting through their mass digitized content. This is important to us as a project because it means we have a user community with lots of individuals, and so we have to figure out how to support them as well as how to support the contracts getting in the money to pay for doing HTR on the mass digitized text. And when we look at the languages that are used in Transkribus, we can see that there are quite a lot of different languages that are used. The interesting thing about this is that German, Latin, English, French, Italian and Dutch were the ones that the platform were supporting when we did the survey. Now we have since our users have generated models since on a lot of different languages, but you'll see here that people were using it for Chinese as well as Japanese, which weren't covered by the system, and that's because you can put in images of text to Transkribus and then use the layout features to generate some data which then you can pull and take in to HTR systems which actually use these. So that was fascinating to us, that people were using the system halfway along the processing pipeline because it was so efficient, and then yanking the data and putting it in their own workflows. So we've actually built something which is useful in various ways to different people. One of my favourite questions on doing these large-scale surveys is to ask people for 3 words. Put 3 words in which you would describe Transkribus, and you know, I got a response back, this is a pointless question. Actually, it makes me be able to make these nice pretty things for talks. So this is a word cloud generated on what 3 words, when you think of Transkribus, what 3 words come to mind? The whole point that it was helping access to historical material. This is the main benefit to handwritten recognition technology. Now that might be obvious, but I want to unpick that a little bit now. What does it mean when we're running handwriting recognition technology across mass digitized content, and what are the kind of things we have to think about when we're providing this service or taking the outputs of HTR when we're using it with our collections? So firstly, there was this aspect of speed and efficiency of HTR. Most people mentioned that it was much faster than having a human undertake transcription. Speed, or it allows for transcribing data that otherwise would not have been transcribed. And I think that's really key. The fact that it is allowing transcriptions of stuff which would not have been transcribed, therefore not findable, therefore not usable, or people would not be able to get access to it. And that's really the crux of why HDR is transforming historical research, but I will unpick that a little bit more. It is very cost effective. Some projects calculated savings of up to 80% on their previous funding to actually undertake transcription, so it is cost effective. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from the talk today, it is this technology is working and is already offering increased access to the historical record. Right? So it's already here, and we can't ignore it anymore. It is happening. People are running stuff through this, and we are outputting large-scale data sets from artificial intelligence, from machine learning, from HDR. So it's here. And it does allow this potential for further processing and data analysis. This means then that it's potentially changing the selection for digitization within libraries and archives. The effective rollout of handwritten text recognition is dependent on getting high quality images. So when I say high quality, it's not just high resolution, it's also, you know, clear, it's also, there's a whole bunch of things which make things work best in HDR. But high quality images through a professional digitization process means that we can put whole collections through and have them transcribed in a way which is much cheaper than using humans. 50% of people in the survey said that the success of HDR will encourage more historical resources to be digitized. And to make the most of HDR then, we have to move away from this selection criteria of only choosing a few bits of a collection to digitize and try and digitize the whole thing. Now, anyone who knows anything about digitization knows that this itself is very costly and it's very resource intensive. At a time of great austerity, to the sector. So while the technology is there to allow us to run artificial intelligence in a very cost-effective manner across these large-scale collections, it's very expensive for us to digitize and time-consuming to digitize whole collections and actually feed them in. So there is a bottleneck still, and we need to look at how we're going to fund this and how we're actually going to make sure that we can take the best things from artificial intelligence for archival practice, of which HDR is one right now, and be able to apply it. And the choices made in the digitization process, the bias is made at that point. The choices which are made of what to digitize and what not to digitize are really going to affect what people can do with manuscripts after. It's always been the case, but HDR is really bringing that home now, that we need to make sure that we are digitizing a whole range of voices and a whole range of archives so that we can open all these up using this technology. So HTR then changes the range and scope of documents which are available for historians. One comment, it's very difficult to know if a document will contain any useful information before deciphering it, which takes a lot of time. Again, this goes back to selection and being able to say, well, digitize the whole thing and then we'll see if it's useful, rather than digitizing something because it is useful. It will allow people to discover needles unsought for in haystacks of historical documents. I love this quote because this is precisely, it hits the nail on the head or the needle on the head as to what HDR is going to do for us as researchers. And it's that aspect of HDR that will have the most effect on present historical method and present historical approach, because we're going to have to look at how we're approaching mass content to search for things and to look at our methods and look at the historical methods for dealing with vast repositories of text which are generated from handwriting documents. I like the fact that people said it was about ambition. It keeps us ambitious even when funding is scarce. That is true, and it also enhances research possibilities, and it might even change the question. And this is the interesting thing for me, really. How does using this technology change the questions we can ask of archives? I don't think we've got our heads around that yet. I think we're just at the start of being able to phrase this. And I hope today I'm kind of showing you some of these things. As a result, we need support for people using HDR, but also using the outputs of HDR in their research. Transkribus just now only has a few tutorials for data processing the results of HDR. Once you've got them, we do have tutorials and frequently asked questions, and we have resource bases. But we've recently partnered with another group of people called Reprogramming Historian, and if you don't know them, go and have a look at their website. They're putting lots of great tutorials out about how to take the stuff, how to take mass digitized content and build other things upon it. So we need to be thinking about this to kind of train up the people who are using HDR, generating this mass digitized content. What do you do with it next to make the most of it? But we also need to look at the information seeking techniques or the methods which people would look through information, especially when we're transforming the results of historical research or the primary historical documents that we can look at and scaling up. So there's a question there for historians. There's also a question about whether people need to understand HTR. I didn't describe in great detail today how it worked, but if people are basing their research upon it, then we need, at least in theory, to understand the technology and its epistemological consequences. So how we're using it to create new knowledge. So that's something we need to take home for Transkribus, and we need to make sure that we're doing more to make HDR understandable. But I'm going to come back to humans here then. What happens when you bring AI into an industry and it replaces the humans? We're disrupting the pipeline for humans to learn skills. We're disrupting the pipeline for humans to be able to do things. And people were talking about Transkribus in this way. They were saying, yes, 80% of costs can be saved. However, we will always need humans who know how HDR works and who know paleography to be able to review machine performance. So we have to stress that machines should never be entirely trusted historians must be trained in paleography to be able to evaluate machine transcriptions, and we need to make sure that even though it's cheaper to use HTR to run across archival material, we need to make sure that the next generation of archivists, digital humanities, are learning paleography and getting the opportunities to develop those skills so they can work with HTR rather than be replaced by HTR. And I think this is really important to think about where the human is. So just to wrap up, I think it's clear that we need to keep an eye on this. We need to do these type of surveys every couple of years to see how HDR and our artificial intelligence is changing the information landscape for historians. And we need to see HDR as a tool that researchers can work with, understand and interact with, not just one that they're using uncritically. And in developing HDR together, it will benefit both providers and users. Just want to shout out to the whole Transkribus team, the current team who are launching the tool, but also the previous partners in the grants, the EU grants, and without all their work I wouldn't be able to do this talk today, so thank you very much. It's been really interesting to be able to come and talk to you today about HTR, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.